income, right? It's a really different country when the top 1% have about 12, 13% of the national income, and when they have 25, 26% where we are now. So while these people have been giving back, changing the world, emancipating, disrupting, what they've actually been doing over here where we're not looking is just grabbing more and more of the pie, rigging the rules to ensure that keeps happening, and frankly using the moral glow that comes with philanthropy, giving something to, Malala, having a Photoshop here and there, to protect the opportunity to keep hoarding, keep monopolizing, and keep stiffing most Americans out of the American dream.
I hear you, but I want to share sort of the tweet that started this conversation between you and I. It's from former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, who wrote, "Anyone who has $1 billion either exploited a monopoly that should have been broken up, got inside information unavailable to other investors, bribed some politicians, or inherited the money from their parents who did one of the above." Here's my issue with this argument. Hate the game, not the player. If the argument is, if you became that rich, you must be some crooked criminal, how are we possibly going to get people, how are we going to get that powerful class to the table to be self-reflective, to say, let's make sure the world doesn't crumble beneath me and make things better? If we're strictly demonizing the super rich, why on earth would they do anything but build a higher wall around their houses?
I don't think that's actually about demonizing. And I think that this is an argument.
Hold on, it's not demonizing.
No, let me explain why. Let me explain why. If you were a man in 1900, you could be a good man or you could be a bad man. But there was no man in 1900 who didn't benefit from the systemic exclusion and persecution of women in every job that those women couldn't compete for. The fact that women couldn't vote for public policies that would be better for half the country, etc.
Amen to that.
There were good men and bad men in that regime, but all of them benefited from an unfair system, right? So the argument there is not that all of those men were crooks or who was not. And I don't want to get into, I have gotten to know through my reporting a lot of billionaires. This is never, and I say this again and again, not a matter of individual morality. This is about an immoral system. And a system that prioritizes having billionaires and letting them keep their billions over health care for everybody, over education that is as good in the south side of Chicago as it is in Greenwich, Connecticut. It's not a question of are billionaires bad people? It's we have made a very weird social decision to allow people to be billionaires before we take care of the public good. And to the point about nefarious or whatever we were arguing about, I think what is undeniably true, if you actually just look at the Forbes list, monopoly is a very big part of many of those stories, right? So we'll take those off. I don't think most Americans actually like monopoly. Fighting for regulations in Washington that allow you to make more than you would make if you didn't have a $50 million lobbying operation, again, that's not free market. If you're confident about your ability in the free market,
shouldn't matter.
You don't lobby $50 million in Washington. If you think about the number of those companies on that 400 Forbes list that underpay workers, that have shifted to contract janitors and dynamic scheduling.
Okay, but right here, then the problem there is capitalism. The problem there is if I'm the CEO of a company, my job function, my fiduciary role is to serve my shareholders and my customers. If we want to change the rules, if we want to change the system and suddenly say, as a CEO of this publicly traded company, I must care about the environment, I must do better for my workers, well, then you're changing things. When Goldman Sachs decided to do their 10,000 Women Initiative, they went to their shareholders, and their shareholders said, take a hike. This is our money. If you want to do something philanthropic with our money, you don't get that opportunity. We get to make that decision. So is it the fault of that CEO or the company, or is it the fault of the system? And we need to say, well, let's revisit how the system works. Because if I'm a CEO, I have to adhere to my fiduciary responsibilities.
I think you're exactly right. I think one of the
I'd like to say that one more time.
I think you're just Stephanie, you're so right.
Come on, every day.
I think one of the things that actually is surprising to people about my book, although I'm a critic of these companies, is I actually think that it's their job to be companies, and it's the society's job to take care of the public good. I think what I don't like is those companies using some cosmetic do-gooding to try to stave off democratic action. I'm going to read, I have this wonderful network of informants in the biggest companies in America, telling me what's really going on.
I like that.
I'll tell you something I got yesterday in an email from someone in one of the most powerful in the news companies in America. This person writes, the only thing that can be trusted in this era of financialization is that companies will primarily act for profit. So other forces must be empowered to combat, counterbalance, and curb this. I think a lot of wise people in corporate America are actually starting to realize the truth of that statement. It's their job to play offense. It's the society's job to think about what kind of healthcare we need, what kind of education we need, and actually to set the rules of the road that will allow most people to avail of the American dream.
I'm with you, and we have the same ultimate goal. But if what's happening right now on the progressive left is demonizing, is to say it should be illegal for Jeff Bezos to be that rich. He's a bad person. This person's a bad person.
Who said he's a bad person?
How are we going
But who
to
said he's a bad person? I don't think Jeff Bezos should be a billionaire or at least have as many billions as he has. Who said he's a bad person?
But do you think that...
My guess is, I've heard he cooks pancakes for guests at his house. I've heard he's a very nice person. That's what I've heard.
Do we know...
That doesn't mean I think he should be a billionaire. And I'll tell you, let's take him for a second.
Figure out a way to get those people to the table. Because if I turn on, let's say, conservative media, we run the risk that we're going to go down a slippery slope where Americans are going to say, hold on, are you controlling how much money I make? And that's not the argument you're trying to make. But if we allow a certain narrative, right, it's like, why is the NRA as powerful as they are? There's tons of people who are members of the NRA who want a little bit of gun control. But the NRA convinces them, well, it's a slippery slope. And if they take bump stocks away, they're coming for your handgun in 6 months. If we go on a hardcore argument that rich people got these gains through nefarious ways, suddenly we could hurt this argument where people say, you can't control how much money I want to make.
I disagree. And I'll tell you why.
No time left. Sorry.
Who was the last president who actually did do a little bit of demonizing? FDR. Called them malefactors of wealth. He was one of them. He was a traitor to his class, which is one of the most noble things you can be.
President Obama did.
With a lot more tempered in his approach than FDR. He did not demonize at all. He talked about, we need to have regulation, common sense regulation. But there was not a going after. We have not seen Democratic presidents in the modern era go after malefactors of wealth, that kind of language.
Yes.
And FDR used the political capital that gave him to actually enact a regulatory apparatus that served us fairly well in terms of finance for decades. And I think a little bit of demonization of people who are stealing the dream from people is fine. I think what you have plutocrats like Donald Trump doing is taking the real anxiety that many Americans have, and instead of actually leading those Americans to punch up at the powerful who stole it, getting them to punch out at Mexicans and other fantasy
causes. And then he's hooking up the powerful.
Correct. And stuffing his cabinet full of them right before they croak. And so I think what's really important right now is for a new politics in this country, not about left and right, but frankly about humanism versus plutocracy. I have spent the last 5 months traveling the country having these conversations with people. A lot of people come into my book events who are on the right, who do all kinds of jobs, who are on the left. And I will tell you, a lot of people have different views about markets, about government. Fine, that's fine. But not a lot of Americans want to live in a Downton Abbey society where very few people own everything, set the rules of the game, and throw symbolic scraps at people from the top of their manor while refusing to get out of the manor.
It's time for a little humanity first. I have a feeling our next conversation needs to be about campaign finance reform. Because if we want people to do that, we're going to have to change how the system works.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.